Hello everybody, welcome to Snyder's Inc. and we got a new top 15. This is top 15 mysterious FBI cases that haunted agents. And we go get right into this. Ladies and gentlemen, hit the like button. I need y'all to hit the subscribe button. And y'all comment what you think down below. Let's get into this. Are you guys ready? Of course you're ready. Let's go!
Number 15. The kidnapping of Patty Hurst. The events that unfolded one night in early February 1974 would go down in history as one of the strangest cases the FBI ever handled. It involved 19-year-old Patricia Campbell Hurst, a young woman who was born into one of the most influential families in the United States. Her grandfather, William Randolph Hearst, founded the Hearst Corporation, which owned various newspapers, including the San Francisco Examiner and the New York Journal, television stations, media outlets, and magazines. The Hearst Corporation was widely considered a media empire. Patty's father...
Yeah, that's why they kidnapped her. Kidnapped her to get some ransom money out of the girl. Out of the grandfather. The grandfather and the father and all them run the Hearst company that's worth millions of dollars. You know what you're gonna do? You're gonna kidnap someone so you can get part, I get a little taste. That means dollars, and it's either gonna succeed well or backfire and you complete.
Father, Randolph Apperson Hearst, served as the chairman of the board of the Hearst Corporation. He and his wife, Catherine Wood Campbell Hearst, were big on philanthropy, focusing on both culture and educational funding. It is easy to see why the Hearsts were so well known across the country.
Yeah.
On February 4th, a group of armed individuals entered Patty Hearst's Berkeley, California apartment, shared with her fiancé, Stephen Weed. Badly beating Weed, the group then took Hearst with them. They later identified themselves as members of the Symbionese Liberation Army, or...
Is this the girl who joined them? Is this the case where there was a girl who got kidnapped that ended up joining the group? Is that what this was? I remember this. I remember there was a case where a girl got kidnapped with this group of like dangerous men, and she just ended up joining them, and it messed up some people. It confused a lot of people. Is that what this was?
SLA. The story of Patty Hearst's kidnapping spread like wildfire. This had been the SLA's plan all along, to kidnap a high-profile victim and make front-page headlines nationwide. Soon after Hearst was taken, the SLA demanded that millions of dollars in food donations be made to the poor across the country in exchange for her release.
What a fascinating thing, guys. Imagine these today. A bunch of they kidnap someone who's related to someone who's very, very rich, and just go, hey, we want you to feed the poor. That's what we want. That's our ransom. We don't want anything else. We just want the poor people to be fed. They would have way more supporters than haters. They would not be people like, bring this girl back, you kid out there, but just like, yeah, freaking they'd have way more supporters than haters.
While she was held captive, the group began trying to manipulate and brainwash Hearst into accepting their beliefs. On April 3rd, the SLA released a tape that featured Hearst announcing that she had joined their organization. It seemed their plan had worked. Roughly 2 weeks later,
I'm gonna be honest, right? You have to be, this no offense to Patty who got kidnapped. You have to be pretty weak-minded to get manipulated pretty quickly. I don't know how long it was after, but I feel like you would have to be, how long ago? Let's go.
April 3rd, the SLA...
April 3rd, so... 2 months later. 2 months later, they had her brainwashed and completely under their control. There are people stronger than that. She wasn't that strong. Especially if she's doing this, she definitely wasn't that strong. Very weak.
The name Tanya was
weak mentally. Weak mentally, where she was able to be manipulated. That kid. Now maybe they're very good at it. There are people who can manipulate even the strongest of individuals. That's why cults exist. But I don't think that's the case here.
Spotted holding an assault rifle during a bank robbery orchestrated by the SLA. When the media heard this, Hearst was no longer considered a victim.
Nope.
She was
no longer a victim. You're a criminal now.
Labeled a willing participant. In May 1974, things took another turn when Hearst denounced her family. Hurst remained involved with the SLA until September 18, 1975, when she was arrested by San Francisco authorities.
That is insane. What, that over a year, I think? Yeah, over a year. She stayed with them, committing crimes, and then got arrested. Didn't get saved, got arrested. Because she kept committing crimes and denounced her family and all that.
Along with 3 other SLA members. Hurst was charged with bank robbery and felonious use of a firearm. At trial, her defense team argued that she had been coerced into joining the SLA. They had kidnapped her after all. Experts were brought in who testified on the effects of psychological manipulation, trying to explain what Hurst's mindset must have been at the time. The prosecution, on the other hand, painted Hurst as a willing participant in the SLA's crimes.
Okay. So they have a point, but they also think. So the point of them she's being emotionally manipulated and psychologically broken, pretty much, to the point that they make her join the group. That probably happened. I believe that. Problem is you know she's still old enough to know what's far and what's not too far. You're robbing banks. You know you shouldn't be. You're pointing guns at people. You know that's a crime. You're not doing anything you don't know is a crime. So I feel that is what would take it out of the case for me.
The jury sided with the prosecution, finding Patty Hurst guilty of the bank robbery and firearms charges. She was sentenced to 7 years behind bars. After Hurst served 2 of those years, President Jimmy Carter commuted her sentence. The FBI's search for Patty Hurst and their investigation into the SLA is still one of the most intensive investigations to date. Hundreds.
Why did he end her sentence? Why did he feel sorry for her? I'm just curious as me now.
Of agents were involved in the case, following up on thousands of leads. Their work was worth it in the end, with the final SLA members being arrested in 1999 and 2002. Number 14.
Well, considering this was started in 1974, that took him a while. 2002? That took a while.
The Krupp diamond theft. Vera Krupp was a former German actress.
I gotta get it out. Hey, sorry there was a cut there. When sitting down, I felt very uncomfortable. I had to go figure out what was going on. Shit, let's get back into this.
Living on an expansive ranch several miles southwest of Las Vegas, she had married a wealthy German industrialist, and their eventual divorce left Krupp in a comfortable financial position. One of her most prized possessions was a diamond ring of more than 33 carats, worth...
That was like a diamond you get from YouTube. Literally shape and all. You know, you get your little YouTube diamond plaque thing. That's what that looks like.
$275,000 back in 1959. It practically never left her finger. On the...
Is that what this is based off of? The YouTube plaque? Is it based off of this thing? I doubt it, but I'm just curious now.
The evening of April 10th, 1959, Krupp and her foreman were finishing dinner when 3 unknown men arrived on the ranch and knocked on her door. They claimed to be offering their services to tar her driveway. Before Krupp had the chance to decline, the men forced their way inside. The robbers bound Krupp and the foreman together and yanked Krupp's prized ring from her finger with such force that it left her bleeding. They then made off with over $1 million in cash, jewels, and other items combined, including the famous diamond ring. Sometime after the 3 men had left, Krupp and her foreman freed themselves. They drove to the Las Vegas airport and called the authorities to report what had happened. The case caught the attention of the FBI, who believed correctly that the diamond had been taken across state lines. FBI agents soon had their eyes on John William Hagenson. Hagenson was a suspect in a California robbery that mirrored what occurred at Krupp's ranch. Over 10 field offices were involved, and they tracked Hagenson's movements across the country. Eventually, he was arrested in Louisiana. Now, the FBI needed to track down the other men involved. 6 weeks after Hagenson was arrested, an agent in Newark, New Jersey, heard about a local grocer looking to sell a big diamond. Agents tracked a gambler named James Reeves to a hotel in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and promptly searched every square inch of the room. The agents hit the jackpot in the lining of one of Reeves's coats. Hagenson, Reeves, and several other men who played a role in the heist were tried and convicted in late 1959. Hagenson later won an appeal and was released. Vera Krupp rebuilt.
How? How did one of them win an appeal and get released from that? How?
The ring, the centerpiece recovered in New Jersey, and the two smaller baguette-shaped diamonds recovered in Chicago, and wore it regularly until her death in 1967. However, she made some lifestyle changes after the trauma of the robbery. She added various safe rooms to her home, and she pinned the Krupp diamond to her bra strap when she went to town, keeping the ring out of view of any prying eyes. In 1968, after Krupp's death, the famous ring was purchased by Richard Burton for his wife, none other than Elizabeth Taylor. Number 13. The murder of Special Agent Hubert J. Trcy, Jr. On March 12, 1942, the FBI and various other law enforcement agencies were notified of two Army deserters who had escaped from their post at Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. 21-year-old Charles J. Lovett and 22-year-old James Edward Testerman had snuck into the room of Sergeant Clifton H. Hall shortly after midnight. After brutally beating the sergeant into unconsciousness, the men stole 4 .45 caliber revolvers and 100 rounds of ammunition. They made their way to the highway and forced a taxi driver at gunpoint to drive them to just outside of Cleveland, Tennessee. There, the driver was forced out of his own cab and robbed. Lovett and Testerman continued on to Sweetwater, Tennessee, where they left the vehicle and boarded a bus bound for Abingdon, Virginia. The FBI were on their trail. Arrest warrants had been issued for car theft and kidnapping, and agents from various eastern and southern field offices were assigned to the case. Agents caught up with the pair in Abingdon, Virginia, where
This is another place I would love to visit. I'd love to get a tour of the FBI. This is one place I would love to do. It will never happen. It will never happen. But I would love to get a tour of the FBI headquarters. Just see what it looks like.
Testerman had a girlfriend. Special Agents Hubert J. Trcy, Jr. and Charles L. Tignor out of the Richmond, Virginia field office had been dispatched to intercept Lovett and Testerman. Soon after the agents arrived in Abingdon, at 9:35 a.m. on March 13th, Agent Trcy spotted two men matching the fugitive's description walking down the street. Trcy and Tignor observed the men walk into a cafe and followed them inside. The agents approached Lovett and Testerman, identifying themselves as FBI and asking the men to identify themselves. Suddenly, Lovett pulled out one of the stolen .45 caliber revolvers, knocking Agent Tignor to the floor with a bullet to the arm. Lovett turned the weapon on Agent Trcy, shooting him in the face. Lovett then turned to Agent Tignor, firing multiple rounds in his direction, then back to Trcy, firing a bullet into the doomed agent's back before exiting the cafe. Agent Tignor mustered enough strength to stand up and attempted to follow the men, but he collapsed in the street outside. The agents were rushed to the hospital. Tragically, Special Agent Hubert J. Trcy, Jr. was pronounced dead on arrival. Agent Tignor suffered wounds.
Wow, so... I mean, this probably could have been done better. The two men identified themselves as FBI to get them to chat with themselves, chat and communicate with the criminals, and the criminals just pulled guns and shot both of them. Seemed like they were completely unprepared for the possibility that they would attack them.
Wounds to his chest, right arm, and left hand. Meanwhile, Lovett and Testerman had commandeered another vehicle. As they attempted to drive through an intersection, a police officer blocked them with his patrol car. A gunfight followed before Lovett and Testerman escaped the scene and sought refuge in the basement of a local home. Law enforcement officers tracked them to the house, and it was soon surrounded by local police as well as police officers from neighboring areas and FBI agents. Another gunfight ensued, culminating in the launch of great quantities of tear gas into the home, driving Lovett and Testerman.
I'm just gonna hope, like they're just into some random home. I hope the people who lived there were not being shot at. That's all my hope is. I hope no one randomly some old ladies, I'm just gonna assume it's old ladies, I'm just gonna say old ladies for these things, I don't know. Some old ladies who are just living in this place who just immediately got shot at. I hope that ain't the case.
Out. Both men were arrested and charged with the murder of Special Agent Trcy. They were found guilty of the crime on April 17, 1942, and sentenced to life imprisonment in Alcatraz. 2 more trials ended in convictions on a host of federal charges, ensuring that they would not be paroled early. Number 12. Kidnapping of Charles Ross. In the late evening hours of Saturday, September 25, 1937, Charles Sherman Ross was driving his car along North Avenue, bound for Chicago. In his passenger seat was his longtime friend and former employee, Florence Freihage. Ross was 72 years old and the retired president of Chicago's George S. Carrington Greeting Card Company. As he cruised down the highway, Ross had little idea of what would happen next. A car had been trailing Ross for some time, shining unusually bright lights in his rearview mirror. "I don't like the looks of this," Ross said to Freihage. "I'll cut over to the side and let him pass." As Ross tried to move away from the suspicious vehicle, it pulled in front of him, blocking his path forward. Before Ross could process what had just happened, John Henry Seidlin jumped from the car with revolver in hand, attempting unsuccessfully to open the driver's door. Seidlin tapped on the glass with his revolver, threatening to shoot Ross if he didn't open up. Seidlin forced Ross into the car, where getaway driver James Atwood Gray was waiting. Before Seidlin returned to the car, he asked Freihage what kind of money Ross could come up with. $500,000? $250,000? Freihage said she didn't know, and tried to convince the kidnapper to let Ross go, but instead, he got back into the waiting vehicle and shot off with Ross inside. Seidlin's final words to Freihage were, "Don't call the police after we have gone, or we'll kill him." Freihage did contact the authorities, however, and thus an exhaustive 4-month search for Charles Ross began.
4-month search? My man, ain't gonna keep this guy for 4 months. There's no way. If he's gonna take 4 months, this man is deceased, he dead, he probably dead. He ain't coming back. You just gotta write him off. Just write him out. Just put the line through him. He done.
And the kidnappers drove Ross into Minnesota, where they had prepared a special hideout near the town of Emily. Seidlin made Ross write out a ransom note, but Ross refused to ask for an amount over $5,000. The kidnapper altered the letter, adding an extra zero to read $50,000, and mailed it to Ross's former business associate, Harvey Brackett. The letter arrived.
He wouldn't write anything more than 5,000. He had to force the thing to go. He's like, "Nah, man, I only want 5,000. He's like, "You bastard, 50,000 dollars."
Arrived on September 30th, 1937. Ross's family and friends followed the ransom request.
I'm gonna assume. I don't know if this thing. Dear Harvey S. Brackett, have payment ready on instant notes to be delivered by employee of Harley Davidson Co. on motorcycle road to designated later rider to drop bag on highway at signal or shot and repeated flashes of light. This is great writing. Rider to then continue forward for 300 yards and turn off road on left side. To continue farther would be fatal. Money to be contained in small leather bag of following. Ignore that word. 20% of payment value in $5 bills, 50% in $10 bills, and 30% in $20 bills. All money to be non-consecutive and unmarked and out of authentic origin. I'm having a moment. I'm seeing words that don't exist. Of authentic origin. When ready, insert following ad in Chicago Tribune. Use cards of sales department. This is stupid as hell. This is
requests laid out in 4 separate letters. The money was ditched on the side of the road before being picked up by a middleman on a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, who then left it in a designated spot. After retrieving the ransom money, Seidlund and Gray returned to Emily and split their ill-gotten gains, Seidlund taking the larger share. On October 10th, at a hideout northwest of Spooner, Wisconsin, Seidlund fought with his partner in the kidnapping, believing Gray was about to attack him. The fight ended in the deaths of both Gray and Ross from multiple gunshot wounds. Seidlund buried them in a pit.
So Ross and one of the people associated with him, that one of the other people who kidnapped him, got killed. So the guy had to bury his own partner.
And drove off. By October 19th, it was clear to Ross's wife that the kidnappers were not going to return her husband.
That's what I was saying. After some period of time, I'm like, okay, he's not coming back. No, he's dead. He's dead.
She turned over to law enforcement a list of serial numbers corresponding to the bills used to pay the ransom. The FBI spent the next 3 months trying to track down the men responsible. Every available resource was thrown at the case, including the latest forensic technology. With the help of citizens all over the country, the FBI tracked the serial numbers in a long trail that stopped in Los Angeles. Seidlund hadn't been stupid enough to keep all of the ransom money. Instead, he exchanged the notes for new money by betting at multiple racetracks across the United States. He never...
I'm gonna be honest, that's really smart. My man went to a racetrack, went on a betting wars, and used some of the ransom money so he'd get new money when he won. Smart man.
Thought this would lead the FBI straight to him. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover headed up the investigation himself, ordering a trap to be set at Santa Anita Racetrack near LA. A handful of agents were set up behind the cashier counters, ready to cross-check any bills being passed through against the list of serial numbers. Meanwhile, other agents were on standby, waiting for a signal that they had their man. On January 14, 1938, John Henry Seidlund was arrested for kidnapping and extortion. After a lengthy interrogation by Director Hoover himself, Seidlund came clean about the kidnapping, the ransom, and the murders. On January 17th, Seidlund showed agents where he had buried the bodies and the remaining $32,645 of the ransom money. On February 28,
Why did he bury the money for? What was his plan to do with that? Was he planning to come get it, or was he just gonna leave it buried?
1938, Seidlund pleaded guilty to the charges against him and was sentenced to death. He was electrocuted on July 14, 1938.
Hold on, when did he get arrested? So, this is the shortest I have seen someone sit on the death penalty. Anytime, all the time, it takes like 50 freaking years. I don't know why it takes so damn long, and I never will learn.
Number 11, the Alcatraz Escape. The Alcatraz Escape has long been considered one of history's greatest mysteries. In 1962, 3 inmates meticulously planned and executed a daring escape from the infamous Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, only to vanish without a trace. Alcatraz, strategically located on an island in the San Francisco Bay, was a maximum security prison surrounded by the frigid waters of the Pacific Ocean. Even if an inmate was able to make it outside the prison walls, they would face an even bigger challenge, making it to shore. Escape was supposed to be impossible, but escape is exactly what Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin aimed to do one June night in 1962. For months, the 3 prisoners meticulously planned their exit from Alcatraz. They carefully chipped away the vent openings in the back of their cells using makeshift tools, such as spoons and a drill made from a stolen vacuum cleaner motor.
These are some smart men. Say whatever you want, these are some smart men.
This led them to the utility corridors behind the cells, which allowed them to move within the prison's infrastructure without the guards noticing what they were doing. On the night of June 11th, the men set off with a makeshift raft and life jackets created from dozens of old raincoats. After squeezing through the vent openings and getting into the utility corridor, they climbed to the roof of the cell block. From there, they scaled the building to the ground floor, crossed a security fence, made their way to the one part of the shoreline that the guard tower couldn't see, and launched their raft. The men were never seen again, or so the story goes. It was hours before guards discovered the men were missing. They had constructed dummy heads and bodies, featuring hair clippings from the barber shop for added authenticity. Guards counted the men throughout the night on their bed checks, unaware that the bodies in the prisoners' beds were not real. A massive manhunt.
These men are brilliant, except for the fact they might not have made it to land. The rest of the time, it was this escape plan was brilliant. Brilliantly done.
Involving the U.S. Marshals, the FBI, and local law enforcement agencies, followed the early morning discovery that Morris and the Anglin brothers had escaped. Officers and agents searched every inch of Alcatraz, while boats, helicopters, and other aircraft were deployed to scan the waters for any sign of the parts of the makeshift raft used in the escape were discovered floating in the bay, along with Ziploc bags of personal effects, including photos of family members and addresses. At this point, the FBI felt fairly certain the men had died in the bay, likely being pushed out to sea by the strong currents. They wouldn't have survived long in the icy water, and it was unlikely any of them would willingly let go of items so dear to them. While death might seem the most likely outcome, the idea of the 3 prisoners making it to shore and living their lives under the radar has long persisted. Various sightings.
I mean, until you find the bodies, right, you can never fully write out the idea they made it to safety. That they didn't make it to safety and hide under the grid. You can't write it out until you find their bodies.
Came in from across the country in the months that followed, but none could be substantiated. The FBI search was officially open until December 1979. After nearly 2 decades of speculation and an exhaustive search effort, the FBI concluded the men had perished. They passed the case on to the U.S. Marshals Service. A report from CBS News claimed that in 2013, John Anglin wrote a letter to the San Francisco Police Department as the last surviving member of the trio. In 2022, 60 years after they made their escape, the U.S. Marshals Service released age-progressed images of the escaped prisoners. They are still looking for them. Number 10.
That is insane.
Murder of Susan Smith. Susan Daniels was born in 1961 in Maydewan, West Virginia. She was the 5th of 9 children born to unemployed coal miner Sid Daniels and his wife Trcy. In 1977, when she was 15 years old, Susan Daniels met 22-year-old local drug dealer Kenneth Smith. By November 19...
What a start. She met 22-year-old, local drug dealer. And I was like, that's where the decline starts in that relationship.
1979, the pair were married. The couple had 2 children together by the mid-1980s, but...
Oh, I bet Smith was making a boatload of money. I bet he was making a great income as a drug dealer.
It was far from an easy relationship.
Of course it is.
Drug abuse played a large role in the frequent conflicts, and they ended up getting a divorce, though they remained living in the same home together with their children. In 1987, Mark Putnam entered the fold. He was an FBI agent who was taking on his first investigation in Pikeville, Kentucky. Putnam had his eyes on 32-year-old Carl Edward Lockhart, who went by the nickname Cat Eyes, an ex-convict and bank robber. Susan's longtime friend and local sheriff's deputy Albert Hartfield introduced Susan to Putnam, recommending that she make some extra money on the side as an informant. Living with Kenneth Smith, a friend of Lockhart, put her in an advantageous position. In December 1987, with the information Susan was able to supply to Putnam, Lockhart was arrested and subsequently sentenced to 57 years in federal prison for robbery. Susan was paid $5,000 for her help. Even though their work together was now technically over, the married Putnam and Susan continued to see one another, beginning a sexual relationship the year after Lockhart's arrest. Putnam claimed this was mainly due to Susan's insistence. In early 1980,
What do you mean it was due to her insistence? How? What did she insist? Now you have my attention. What do you mean it was due to her insistence? I have never heard that term used to describe a woman and a dude having a relationship. She was very insistent. She said we should have sex and I couldn't argue with it, so I had to go along with it. She was very insistent. Like, what?
1989, he requested to be transferred to Florida, taking him far away from Susan. He returned briefly in mid-1989 to finish an unrelated investigation. It was then that Susan broke the news. She was pregnant with Putnam's child. On June 8, 1989, Putnam drove Susan Smith to an isolated area to discuss what to do going forward. Putnam later claimed Susan threatened to expose her pregnancy to his superiors in the FBI and his family. A fight broke out between the two, and Putnam strangled Susan. He then placed her body in the trunk of the car and dumped her body at an old coal mining road. Putnam...
Man, you an FBI agent! How can you be this stupid? In fairness, I was gonna say, why does he care if the FBI find out? I was just like, well, they did meet via the FBI because she was an informant for him, and now she's sleeping with him while met. Yeah, that could get him in some shit. I'm not saying he's justified, but I get it.
Promptly left Kentucky and returned home to Florida. Susan was reported missing a few days later by her sister Shelby Ward, and an investigation followed. As Susan had been an FBI informant, the Bureau became involved early on. Naturally, they looked closely at Putnam. After failing a polygraph exam, Putnam confessed to strangling Susan to death and directed the authorities to her body. Later that year, he was sentenced to 16 years on the reduced charge of manslaughter in exchange for his cooperation. Mark Putnam was the first FBI agent to ever be charged with homicide. He spent 10 years behind bars before he was released for good behavior in 2000 at the age of 41. By then, he was widowed and bankrupt. Number 9.
I bet he was, because I bet she divorced him, because she was like, he committed a homicide. Oh, okay, that's already not good stuff. He killed someone he slept with while he was married to me, and she got pregnant. Oh, okay, so yeah, we're divorcing.
The capture of John Gotti. John Gotti, known as the Teflon Don and the Dapper Don, was one in a long line of mobster bosses targeted by the FBI since its inception. At his peak, Gotti was considered one of the most dangerous and influential men in the United States. John Gotti Jr. was born on October 27, 1940, in the South Bronx, New York City. He and his brother became involved in criminal activities in their teen years, mainly selling drugs. Gotti went on to join the Gambino crime family, where his ambition and ruthless temperament helped him quickly rise through the ranks. Multiple efforts to put Gotti behind bars ended in 3 trials without conviction, earning him the nickname the Teflon Don. In 1985, Gotti made a move that brought him to the head of the Gambino family. He conspired with other influential members to have boss Paul Castellano and underboss Thomas Bilotti assassinated outside a Manhattan restaurant. Once the job was done, Gotti was the main man in town. Unlike leaders before him, Gotti had no intention of staying under the radar. He flaunted his wealth with expensive, flashy suits and sports cars. The FBI, which had arrested Gotti before on smaller charges, noticed. Gotti's Teflon reputation came to an end in 1990 when his underboss, Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, turned on him and testified as a state witness in Gotti's trial. With Gravano's help, Gotti was convicted of the murder of Paul Castellano, racketeering, and many other charges. He was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He spent his remaining years at the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois.
I wonder what it's like for a mob boss to sit in prison. Like, what's it like for a mob boss in prison? Because they're either very on top when it comes to leading a group inside the prison to make sure he's protected, or he's getting his ass kicked by a bunch of people who they probably have issues with.
Until his health failed him. While he was behind bars, Gotti spent most of his time in solitary confinement, with only 1 hour a day spent outside his cell. When he was allowed out with the other prisoners, Gotti didn't exactly make friends.
No.
On July 18, 1996, he was punched by inmate Walter Johnson after Gotti allegedly called him a racial slur. In retaliation, Gotti tried to have Johnson murdered. He went to the heads of the Aryan Brotherhood and offered an amount ranging from $40,000 and $400,000 to kill Johnson. Despite the order being given, Johnson was saved after being moved to an out-of-state prison. In the years that followed, the influence and power of the Gambino crime family greatly decreased. The arrest and conviction of John Gotti and other group members saw the beginning of the end for what once were New York City's most dangerous mobsters. Number 8. The DC Snipers. In the early 2000s, the quiet streets of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area became a hunting ground for two men bent on inflicting maximum harm. It began on a Wednesday, October 2, 2002, in Aspen Hill, Maryland. A gunshot narrowly missed Ann Chapman, a cashier at a Michael's craft store. The incident was ruled an accidental misfiring, but that was far from the truth. An hour later, 55-year-old James Martin was shot and killed in a grocery store parking lot a few miles away in Wheaton, Maryland. The unknown assailant struck again and again, each time with a single shot from a long distance. On the morning of October 3rd, 4 more individuals were killed within 3 hours. Chief of Police Charles Moose spoke at a press conference and notified parents that all schools had been instructed to keep the children indoors. The random nature of the killings baffled the police, and the FBI reached out to offer assistance. On October 4th, 43-year-old Caroline Sewell was shot in the chest while she loaded her shopping bags into her vehicle. The following 2 days were quiet, with no new reports of any shootings. That changed on the morning of October 7th, when 13-year-old student Iran Brown was shot in the chest. He was rushed to hospital and miraculously survived. When the crime scene was examined, the authorities found a shell casing, along with a tarot card with the phrase, "Call me God," written on it. 2 days later, Dean Harold Myers, a civil engineer, was shot and killed at a gas station in Manassas.
To think you could just be in a vehicle sniping people from inside the vehicle and not think twice on it, like, that is terrifying. To think that out of nowhere you could just be shot. You'd have no idea. That is terrifying.
Virginia. In the week that followed, 2 more were shot dead in Fredericksburg and Falls Church, Virginia. On October 19th, another man was shot in a Ponderosa Steakhouse parking lot in Ashland, Virginia. Investigators found a lengthy letter hidden in the woods adjacent to the parking lot. It demanded a $10 million payout for the violence to stop. The letter also suggested that children could be the next victims, indicating that they were not safe. The last victim, 35-year-old Conrad Johnson of Silver Spring, Maryland, was shot and killed on October 22nd. The FBI had worked tirelessly while the killings had continued. Ballistic evidence had been used to link many of the crimes to the same perpetrator. They were on the hunt for a blue Chevrolet Caprice that had been seen by multiple witnesses at multiple crime scenes. On October 23, 2002, law enforcement officers found the blue Chevrolet Caprice at a rest stop in Maryland.
I think I know what this one. Do you guys remember? Mr. Ballin did one of those top 3 photos with disturbing backstories. I think it's what it was called, one of that series or something like that. One of them involved this case because it was 2 people. It was either photos with disturbing backstories or sound fake but 100% real. I think it's that one. Sounds fake but 100% real. And in that thing, they are at a truck stop and they see a guy, one dude sleeping in the car, or 2 people in the car, one sleeping, one standing there, just staring at the dude as he waits. The dude waits for his wife to get out of the car, or get out of the bathroom. Get out of the bathroom, they go in the car, and they just drive off and go to a wedding or something like that. Forget about it. Until later, they go to all the news. It shows that car and how the snipers have been caught.
Inside the vehicle were 41-year-old John Allen Muhammad and 17-year-old Lee Boyd Malvo.
Yep, it is that one. It is this kid. It is the one that involves that. Ha!
Along with a single high-powered rifle. Shockingly, it was determined that the motive behind these attacks had been money, nothing else. Muhammad and Malvo planned to hold the area hostage, creating enough chaos and fear that authorities would have to pay the $10 million ransom. In 2003,
you stupid, that plan. That plan was actually incredibly stupid. That was you didn't think much. You didn't think well there.
Both men faced multiple trials in Virginia and Maryland for a number of the murders, all ending in conviction.
Yep.
Lee Boyd Malvo, who was a minor at the time of the crimes, was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. John Allen Muhammad was sentenced to death in Virginia for his role as the mastermind behind the attacks. He was executed on November 10, 2009.
Years. Took years. Someone explain why it takes so long. I can never figure this out.
Number 7. The Trailside Killer. From August 1979 to May 1981, a mysterious figure aptly dubbed the Trailside Killer cast a shadow across popular hiking trails throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. The killer would stalk his chosen victims before finding the opportune moment to strike. It started when 44-year-old Etta Kane was found in Mount Tamalpais State Park, murdered with a single bullet to the back of the head on August 20th. Her body had been set on its knees, face to the ground, as though she were begging for her life. On October 21st, Mary Frances Bennett was stabbed to death at Land's End. No one would know that these two murders were committed by the same killer until December 2009, 30 years later. Some months passed without further casualties until March 1980. Barbara Schwartz was out walking her dog when—
Wait, did they just say this wasn't solved till 2009? Did I see that? Yeah, 2009 it wouldn't be till it was solved.
When a man appeared with a knife, stabbing her to death and rushing away from the scene. 7 months later, Ann Alderson was on a jog through the woods. She stopped to watch the sunset, and a man approached her with his gun drawn. Alderson was before being shot, execution style, in the head.
It's curious that whoever's doing this doesn't seem to have a routine. It's either a gun or a knife, but he never seems to know which one. He just kind of chooses one.
Her body wasn't discovered until weeks later, less than a mile from where Etta Kane had been discovered, both bodies placed in a kneeling position. Local law enforcement agencies were finding it difficult to gather evidence that could point them to their man. As the body count rose, the FBI was brought in to aid in the investigation. On November 30th, about 50 miles north of San Francisco, at Point Reyes, the bodies of Shauna Mae and Diana, or Diane according to some sources, O'Connell, were found, killed in the same fashion as Alderson and lying face down. An autopsy showed that Mae had been— While searching for these missing women, the authorities found the bodies of Rick Stowers and Cindy Moreland, shot to death earlier in October. By this stage, the authorities believed there was a serial killer on the loose.
No shit, Sherlock! Oh, it's about like 8-10 people dead. You know what? Someone might be killing multiple people. There might be someone who has killed more than one people. I think that's who this might be. No fucking shit!
Warned people away from being anywhere near these nature paths, unsure where the killer would strike next. The hunt for the Trailside Killer was one of the first examples of the FBI using profiling to determine the likely characteristics of the murderer. The killer was local, white, working class, shy, and had a speech impediment and previous run-ins with the law. The pivotal—
What part of this, I need to know, made you think he was white? I'm not saying he wasn't white. I'm just curious, what about— because you're trying to profile someone. Why— how do you know he's white? Does someone assume he's white? Does someone who survived tell you he was white? I doubt that. So, like, who— what did you use to gain the fact he was white? I'm just curious with that one.
pivotal moment in the investigation came in March 1981. Another couple, this time in a park outside of Santa Cruz, many miles south of San Francisco, was attacked. This time, however, there was a survivor. Steve Herdel worked with law enforcement agencies to create a composite sketch of the man who killed his girlfriend Ellen Hansen while he recovered from his wounds. The sketch was widely circulated to the public, leading to a tip from someone who believed the man in the sketch was an ex-convict named David Carpenter. David Carpenter was a San Francisco native who had developed a stutter at a young age, perhaps a consequence of having an abusive, alcoholic father and a controlling mother. Carpenter's childhood behavior was also marked by bedwetting and reputed to be early signs of a developing serial killer.
I'm about to say, anytime I see here that someone tortured animals, I'm gonna assume that if you see someone that tortures animals at any point, Get them help, because if not, they're going to kill someone. It's just always how it turns out, okay?
When he was just 13 years old, Carpenter was put in juvenile detention for murdering 2 of his cousins. In 1960, Carpenter attacked a woman with a knife and a hammer, for which he was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 14 years in prison, serving around half that time before early release. A few years later, Carpenter spent several years in prison again, this time for kidnapping and robbery. It was May 1979 when he was released. 3 months before Etta Kane's body was discovered, Carpenter was put under surveillance as the investigators worked to tie him to the crimes. When Heather Skaggs went missing in May 1981, circumstantial evidence pointed to Carpenter once again. Carpenter was arrested on May 14th, and Skaggs's body was found in Big Basin Redwood State Park 10 days later. Physical evidence collected at the crime scenes, including hair and fibers, linked Carpenter to the crimes. Ballistics connected the Skaggs murder with several of the other victims, and the gun used in the murders was found in Carpenter's possession. Carpenter was found guilty of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to death for his crimes. He was sent to death row at San Quentin State Prison in California, where he remains today at 93 years old. Number 6. The Brinks Robbery. As the day drew to a close on January 17, 1950, workers from Brinks Inc., a Boston, Massachusetts security firm, were finishing up their day's work. Sacks of undelivered cash, checks, and securities lay about, in process of being returned to the secure vault on the second floor. Suddenly, they were surprised by 5 disguised individuals who restrained the employees at gunpoint. In a matter of moments, they managed to steal over $2.7 million in cash and other items of value. At the time, this was the largest robbery ever in the United States. Once the thieves had slipped away, a Brinks employee contacted the Boston PD. Within minutes, the investigation was underway. There wasn't much the employees could tell them about the robbers. They were all dressed in Navy-style peacoats, gloves, and chauffeur's caps. Their faces were fully concealed by...
I just want to mention this because I was thinking of these old crimes. I'm in disbelief, because you know that they have arrested and have sent someone and put someone to court for the murder of Tupac Shakur. I know now. I was shocked when I heard this. I don't know if there's a video. I can't do anything on it yet because I need to wait till there's a video that's on it, because I really want to talk about like what they did to go through that to find him, because it is fucking fascinating.
Behind masks. They hadn't spoken much, moving meticulously through their planned routine, with each individual seemingly knowing his or her role in the operation. In addition to statements, law enforcement collected physical evidence: a chauffeur's cap dropped by one of the perpetrators, the tape from the victims' mouths, the ropes used to bind them. The FBI found that 4 revolvers had been taken in the heist, and they had the serial numbers of these firearms on file. Hundreds of interviews were conducted in the months that followed, and a $100,000 reward was offered for any information that led to the identification and conviction of those responsible. The FBI was flooded with tips from across the country. Every one of these was pursued, but over and over again, it seemed the authorities were hitting a dead end. Attempts to identify the group using the chauffeur's hat, rope, and tape led nowhere. On February 4th, 1950, a group of boys playing along Mystic River in Somerville, Massachusetts, found 2 revolvers. One was rusty and was thrown away. The other ended up in the hands of a police officer, and after testing, it was found to be one of the 4 stolen in the Brinks robbery. The banks of the Mystic River were extensively searched, but no further evidence linked to the heist was found. Another break in the case came on March 4th, 1950, when pieces of a green Ford truck were uncovered at a dump in Stoughton, Massachusetts. It matched the description of a truck seen near the Brinks offices on the evening of the heist. Whoever dismantled the vehicle used a sledgehammer and some sort of welding equipment to finish the job. As it turns out, the truck had been stolen from a Ford dealership in Boston on November 3rd, 1949. While this seemed like a promising lead, it again went nowhere. Despite the frustrations of the investigation, the FBI managed to come up with a handful of potential suspects. Anthony Pino, who had been suspected of a number of previous robberies and burglaries in Massachusetts, had an exceptional reputation as a caseman for his keen observation of potential heist sites. Joseph McGinnis was a well-known criminal who had previous drug and robbery-related convictions. He was suspected of planning and leading the Brinks heist. Joseph James O'Keefe and Stanley Albert Gusciora had been involved in previous crimes together as strong men. Both men had family near Stoughton, where the Ford had been dumped. By January 12, 1956, FBI agents had warrants to arrest 11 men who played roles in the heist, including McGinnis and Pino. O'Keefe and Gusciora were included in those 11 men, but were both already in prison on different charges. Another of the 11 was dead. 2 other suspects fled, but they were tracked down a few months later. By August 1956, O'Keefe had pleaded guilty to his role in the heist, and Gusciora had died of cerebral edema. The remaining 8 were taken to trial on August 6th. After a lengthy trial that featured over 100 witnesses, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. All 8 were convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Number 5. The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. James Riddle.
Oh, the one they haven't solved to this day. Jimmy Hoffa one I don't think has been solved to this day.
Hoffa was born on February 14, 1913, in Brazil, Indiana. Hoffa grew up in a working-class family and left school in the 9th grade to work and support his family. He met his future wife, Josephine Poziwak, at a non-unionized laundry workers' strike in March 1937. They went on to have 2 children together, daughter Barbara and son James. Hoffa became involved in unions at a young age. It all began at an early grocery store job where he tried to form a labor union to fight poor working conditions and low pay. Even though Hoffa was younger than many of the other workers, he showed real courage and confidence, and they trusted him. After leaving the grocery store, Hoffa joined the Teamsters, a labor union that covers both the United States and Canada. Hoffa quickly climbed through the ranks to become head of Teamsters Local 299, then all the Detroit locals, and then of all the Teamsters in Michigan. He gained a reputation for being charismatic, but also bold enough to confront employers about their treatment of workers. In 1952, he became the national vice president of the Teamsters. 5 years later, Hoffa was elected president. Under his leadership, the union's membership base and influence across the nation increased drastically. Unfortunately, Hoffa developed a bit of a reputation for not doing things by the book. The first charges laid against him came just 2 years after he was made president. On March 14, 1957, Hoffa was arrested for trying to bribe an aide to the U.S. Congress's Select Committee. He adamantly denied these claims and was later acquitted. But this arrest led to further investigations into Hoffa's behavior and actions. In 1963, Hoffa was indicted on charges of jury tampering and attempted bribery during a previous trial in Nashville, Tennessee. He was convicted the following year and sentenced to 8 years behind bars, along with a $10,000 fine. Hoffa received further convictions for related crimes in the years that followed, which amounted to a 13-year sentence. However, on December 23, 1971, Hoffa was released after serving a little less than 5 years when President Richard Nixon commuted his sentence to time served. Following his release, Hoffa had plans to regain control of the Teamsters, but this would never be. On the morning of July 30, 1975, Hoffa left his home in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, for a scheduled meeting at the local Machus Red Fox restaurant. Hoffa failed to return that night, and his wife Josephine reported him missing early the next day. He was last seen outside the restaurant, where witnesses reported seeing him waiting in the parking lot for a car to pick him up. Some sources suggest that Hoffa was supposed to meet Anthony Provenzano, a Teamsters official with mafia connections, and Anthony Giacalone, a known mobster, that day. Provenzano and Giacalone both denied this was the case. In 1982, Jimmy Hoffa was declared legally dead. Despite the best efforts of the FBI and other law enforcement agencies, no definitive evidence has ever been found pointing to Hoffa's whereabouts. Perhaps organized crime bosses wanted to stop Hoffa regaining control of the Teamsters. It is likely we will never know.
Isn't there a rumor that he's buried under a stadium? Isn't that a rumor? I don't remember where it is, but I remember there was a rumor going around that he was built, that his grave area was a stadium was built over it. Do you all know this rumor or where it's won? I don't remember.
Number 4. Victor Garina. On September 12, 1983, Victor Garina arrived for his usual shift at the Wells Fargo Express Company. The 25-year-old father of 2 was employed as a car guard for the company's armored vehicles. Garina's superiors saw him as a diligent, trustworthy employee. He was engaged at the time to Ana Soto and seemed to have a stable, normal life. When Garina arrived at work, he asked his supervisor, James McKeon, if he could park the Buick LeSabre he had borrowed from a friend inside the building adjacent to Bay 5. Recent thefts from cars in the parking lot had made everyone anxious, so it was not surprising, and McKeon okayed it. As planned, Garina and his partner Timothy Gerard then did their scheduled route, collecting over $3 million in notes from local banks and businesses. The vaults inside Wells Fargo had over $4 million. At 9 p.m. that evening, Garina, Gerard, and McKeon were alone in the terminal. Garina very quietly disarmed both of his co-workers and forced them onto the floor. After taping their mouths shut, tying their arms behind their backs, and duct taping their feet together, he covered their heads with jackets and injected them with a liquid that he said would make them sleep. Subsequent talk screens, however, showed no known drugs in their systems. With no one to stop him, Garina loaded $7 million in cash from the armored vehicle and the vaults into the Buick. As Garina pulled out of the bay, Gerard and McKeon heard him honk his horn once, as if to signal a partner in crime. Garina's co-workers eventually freed themselves and notified the police. The next day, Garina's car was found dumped less than 10 miles away. There were 2 guns inside, but not a single dollar of the $7 million. The investigation that followed pinned Garina as a member of Los Macheteros, a terrorist group advocating Puerto Rican independence from the United States. Tracing his movements, authorities believe Garina was moved to Mexico with a portion of the cash in the months that followed the heist. After that, he went to Cuba and sent the money to Puerto Rico. Los Macheteros used this money to buy the surface-to-air missile launched in an attack on the FBI headquarters in San Juan, Puerto Rico on October 30th.
The people used the money to get a missile to go right into the FBI building in San Juan, Puerto Rico. That is crazy. That terrorist group, alright.
1983. Luckily for those inside, the damage to the building was minimal. In August 1985, 14 people were arrested for their roles in the Wells Fargo heist in various locations across the United States. Victor Garina was not among them. As of today, Garina remains on the FBI's most wanted list. He is described as
My man's still missing. That is okay. He gets your credit for that. He's remained missing for over 40 years. Almost 50 years, I think. 80, 90, 2000, 2010. Yeah, 50 years. Well done.
5 foot 6 inches tall with brown hair and green eyes. He has a 1-inch scar and mole on his right shoulder blade. If Garina is still alive, he would be over 60. He is considered highly dangerous and should not be approached. You are urged to contact 1-800-225-5324. Number 3. The murder of James Ricks. One late summer night in 1967, James Ricks was sitting in his car in North Little Rock, Arkansas, when he heard a tap on his window. On the other side were 2 robbers fleeing the scene of a crime whose getaway car had broken down. Ricks, a 27-year-old black man with a small child, was shot and locked in the trunk of his own car. At this stage, Ricks was still alive but severely wounded. After driving around for some time, the men pulled over and shot Ricks in the back of the head, killing him, and disposed of the body in the woods in a remote, rural area of Arkansas. Ricks's remains were discovered by hikers on August 27th, 2 months after he was murdered and already reduced to a skeleton. Meanwhile, 20-year-old James Leon Clay and his 25-year-old brother, Leon Jr. Clay, had been arrested and were later convicted of robbery and car theft for their actions that night. However, they were never charged with the murder of James Ricks. 40-some years passed.
Why? Did they not know he was dead, or was it just them so stupid they couldn't connect the dots? Like, I don't know how you do not arrest them for murder when the man's clearly been shot in his own vehicle.
Before Ricks's case was revisited, Special Agent Justin Downen from the FBI Baltimore Division's Dover Resident Agency got a call from someone who claimed his brother-in-law's prison cellmate confessed in 2012 to the murder of James Ricks, whose case was not familiar to Downen. Downen and Officer Derek Calloway went to interview James Leon Clay's cellmate. The informant was able to give the men a detailed account of Ricks's murder, including the type of gun used, the location of the body, and specific circumstances around it. Clay's cellmate lay on the bottom bunk, taking detailed notes, while Clay confessed from the top bunk. Clay claimed that his older brother forced him to kill Ricks, and that he regretted it. The investigators decided the best course of action was to wait for Clay's release to try and get a taped confession from him. In December 2014, they finally had their chance. The agents planned a seemingly random meeting between Clay and his former cellmate, now out of prison. Both men recognized each other in a waiting room at the Delaware Department of Probation and Parole and began catching up, Clay unaware that every word he said was being recorded. After leaving the office, they went to Clay's vehicle, where they continued talking, and Clay repeated his confession. James Leon Clay was then arrested and charged with the murder of James Ricks. After hearing that the judge presiding over the case had ruled the tape admissible, Clay pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 20 years behind bars. As he was 67 years old at the time of his 2015 arrest, there is a high likelihood that Clay will die behind bars. After almost 50 years, James Ricks finally got justice, and his remaining family members were given a small measure of...
I'm still baffled at how they never got... It took so long to charge him.
peace. Number 2, Donald Eugene Webb. On August 4th, 1980, 49-year-old career criminal Donald Eugene Webb was on his way to rob a jewelry store when Police Chief Gregory B. Adams made what he thought would be a routine traffic stop. Asked for his license and registration, Webb gave Adams the driver's license of his wife's deceased husband. As Adams examined the license, Webb pulled out a gun and shot the police chief. Adams returned fire as Webb got out of the car and began fighting with the police chief. Webb took Adams's weapon from him and proceeded to pistol whip him multiple times, causing deep lacerations to his face. Webb then shot Adams once in the arm and once in the chest. In a tragic twist of fate, Adams had lent his bulletproof vest to another officer and was unprotected as Adams lay wounded.
Never do that ever. I don't care how nice you are. Never lend your bulletproof vest to someone else. Always have that on you. That was just a bad move.
On the ground, Webb stole his gun and ran over to his patrol car to rip out his radio and steal his keys, rendering the police chief helpless before getting back into his own vehicle. Police Chief Gregory Adams later died in the hospital. Webb's fake ID and blood were found at the scene. His rented car was later discovered at Howard Johnson's motel. Inside the car, investigators found blood stains likely from Webb. In 1981, a year after the crime was committed, Donald Eugene Webb was placed on the FBI's most wanted list. He would remain there for the next 25 years. Webb had ties to both Fall River and New Bedford in Massachusetts. The last confirmed sighting of him came from this area in 1981, which had been called in by an anonymous tipster. By the time the FBI heard this, Webb was long gone. Over the following years, various unconfirmed sightings came in from an array of places, including Washington, Canada, and even Costa Rica. By 1999, Webb had beaten the record for the longest time on the FBI's most wanted list. He was eventually removed in 2007 to make space for more pressing criminals. The distinct lack of leads into Webb's whereabouts led to some investigators to suspect that he had died. In late 2015, the FBI announced an increased reward of $100,000 for information that led to either the arrest of Webb or the location of his remains. In 2016, the FBI found a hidden room in Lillian Webb's home. Threatening to charge Lillian with harboring a criminal, the agents pressured the widow into confessing. She had, in fact, been hiding her husband between her two houses in the years following Adams's murder. Lillian told the authorities that her husband suffered multiple strokes toward the end of his life before one finally killed him in 1999, 19 years after Webb killed Adams. Lillian buried her husband on the land surrounding her home. On July 17, 2017, these remains were found and positively identified as those of Donald Eugene Webb.
So the man was never caught. He got killed by a stroke. That thing. So he never got caught for the crimes he committed.
Number 1. Alejandro Castillo. On October 24, 2017, Alejandro Castillo was placed on the FBI's most wanted list for the murder of his co-worker and ex-girlfriend, 23-year-old Truquan Lai Sandy Lay. Nearly 6 years later, Castillo remains at large. There is currently a $250,000 reward for his capture. Alejandro Rosales Castillo was born on November 26, 1998, in the state of Arizona. In 2016, Castillo was 17 years old and working at a restaurant in Charlotte, North Carolina, where he met Sandy Lay. Castillo had borrowed a sum of money from Lay during a brief period when they were dating, money he still owed her when that relationship ended. On August 9, 2016, Castillo sent Lay a message asking to meet up so he could repay her. Lay, eager to recover the money she had asked Castillo for repeatedly, agreed and arranged to meet him at a Quick Trip in Charlotte. The last time anyone saw Sandy Lay alive was at the Quick Trip. Little is known about what happened next. Castillo's new girlfriend Amia Feaster drove him to meet Lay. Authorities believe that Castillo forced her to withdraw money from her bank account, possibly at gunpoint. Lay's uncle says $1,000 was withdrawn from an ATM, emptying her account. Then, it is thought Castillo took Lay out to an isolated wooded area in neighboring Cabarrus County, shot her once in the head, execution style, and left her body in a ravine. Castillo and Feaster then made a run for it in Lay's Toyota Corolla. They abandoned her car outside a Phoenix bus shelter before heading to Nogales, Arizona, where they were captured on surveillance footage crossing into Mexico. This was the final confirmed sighting of Castillo. On October 20th, 2016, Amia Feaster turned herself over to authorities in Aguascalientes, Mexico. She was extradited and charged with accessory after the fact of felony murder and larceny of a motor vehicle. Feaster claimed she and Castillo had spent the last 2 months living with his cousins in Aguascalientes. Then, Castillo disappeared. Investigators believe he is likely still hiding out in Mexico. If you believe you have information that could aid in the arrest of Castillo, you are urged to contact your local FBI office or Charlotte's FBI office at 704-672-6100.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for this reaction video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Thank y'all for watching. I'll see y'all for the next one.